Some people come to a country as tourists. Some come as businessmen. Some come in chains. Is the story of Jae-won Park. In the year 2001, a cargo vessel docked at the Port Harcourt waterfront. Under the cover of night, amid the crates and the shadows and the thick, heavy air of the Niger Delta, a young Korean man was escorted off that ship, in handcuffs, not as a guest, not as an investor, but as a prisoner. His name was Jae-won Park. He was 26 years old. Back in Seoul, South Korea, he had been a low-level operative for an international smuggling ring. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make decisions. Simply moved packages. But when the operation collapsed, the men at the top, the powerful men, the untouchable men, they disappeared. And was left holding the evidence. He was convicted, and in a complicated extradition agreement that few newspapers bothered to report, he was transferred to serve part of his sentence in a Nigerian correctional facility in Imo State, a decision so unusual that even the prison guards scratched their heads the day he arrived. The warden, a heavy-set man named Emeka Obi, looked at the new prisoner and turned to his officer. "This Korean? We have never had a Korean. What did this one do?" The officer replied, "Smuggling, sir. International." The warden looked Jae-won up and down. "Does it slowly? Put him in Block C. Let him learn our heat before he learns our language." Block C was not a place. It was a punishment. 40 men. In a space designed for 15. No fans. No windows facing the breeze. Just the suffocating, pressing breath of southern Nigeria's humidity. And the distant sound of the Niger Delta, crying softly in the night. Jae-won Park sat on the concrete floor that first night. And he wept. Not loudly. Silently. The way a man weeps when he does not want anyone to know he is broken. He didn't cry for his freedom. Because he could not see a single face that looked like his. He could not hear a single word he understood. He could not smell anything at all. That reminded him of home. He was completely, utterly, alone. 6 months into his sentence, Jae-won did something that would change the entire course of his life. He asked the prison chaplain for a dictionary. The chaplain, a gentle, kind-eyed man named Father Innocent, was so surprised that he stood still for a full 10 seconds before responding. Then he smiled and brought Jae-won an Igbo English dictionary. Father Innocent asked him, "Why do you want to learn our language, my son?" Jae-won looked up at him from the floor and said quietly, "Because a man who cannot speak is less than a prisoner. He is a ghost." Father Innocent stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. And from that day forward, he became Jae-won's unlikely teacher. But the real education did not come from a book. It came from the jungle. The prison ran a work program where inmates cleared land on the outskirts of Owerri, cutting back the thick, relentless, ancient bush, while other prisoners cursed the heat and dragged their feet. Jae-won watched. He noticed which plants grew fastest after cutting. He noticed where the soil was darkest, most alive. He began to understand the land the way a farmer's son understands it, not by reading about it, but by watching it and feeling it between his fingers. And then one afternoon, while hacking through a wall of dense undergrowth with his machete, his blade struck something hard, something metallic. He crouched down, brushed away the dirt and roots with his bare hands. And there it was. Old pipes. Very large ones. He called the supervising officer over. "This officer, there is something under here." The officer glanced down, shrugged, and laughed. "This, leave it. Everything in this jungle belongs to the government. Or the spirits. Either way, not your problem." Jae-won said nothing, but he filed that moment away in his memory, like a deposit in a bank. He was beginning to see what others were too tired or too hopeless to notice. Opportunity, buried just beneath the surface. Jae-won Park had become something the prison system had absolutely no category for. He was fluent enough in Igbo to joke with the guards, sharp enough in English to help draft official letters for the warden, and skilled enough with his hands to repair the prison's failing water pump, a job that 3 outside contractors had failed to complete. Word began to travel, all the way to the State Commissioner of Interior Affairs, a pragmatic, sharp-minded man named Chief Daikamara. They told him there was a Korean prisoner in Imo State who was quietly running half the prison's operations. He came to see for himself. He sat across from Jae-won in a small room. "They tell me you fixed our pump. Where did you learn engineering?" Jae-won met his eyes and replied, "I didn't, sir. I learned how to solve problems. Engineering is just a problem, with a technical name." The commissioner leaned back in his chair. Then he asked, "What would you do if you were free?" Jae-won did not hesitate. "I would stay in Nigeria, sir. And I would make something of this land that even Nigerians haven't imagined yet." The commissioner laughed, then stopped laughing, then pulled out a notepad. 3 months later, through a combination of diplomatic paperwork, a formal recommendation from the commissioner, and a pardon petition that Father Innocent personally carried on a bus all the way to Abuja, Jae-won Park walked out of Imo Correctional Facility, a free man. He had no money, no contacts, no phone, and no plane ticket home. Just to stay. But here is the twist that nobody expected. The commissioner had not freed him out of pure kindness. He had a proposal. He wanted Jae-won to manage a piece of land near Owerri, land that the government couldn't develop, land that investors kept abandoning, land that sat on top of something that nobody had officially confirmed yet. The commissioner spread a map across the table. He pointed to the coordinates. Jae-won stared at that map and felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Those coordinates matched exactly where his machete had struck metal 3 years earlier. For 2 years after his release, Jae-won Park lived inside that jungle. Not near it. Inside it. He built a small structure from salvaged zinc sheets and rough-cut timber. For walls, a roof, a mosquito net, a gas lamp. At night, the sounds were otherworldly. The shriek of birds in the dark canopy, the low moan of wind through ancient trees, the distant bark of dogs in the village half a mile away. Local villagers thought he was either a madman or a spirit. Children would creep close to his fence in the afternoons and scatter, screaming the moment he moved. The village elder, a wise, weathered man named Nwosu, told his people, "The Oyabo Korean man has gone inside the bush, and he is not dead. Whether the land has accepted him, or he is something we do not have a name for." Jae-won surveyed the land. He mapped it by foot. He dug where the earth was soft and dark. He hired 2 young men from the village, Chikwudi and Ifani, paying them with food and the promise of something bigger. And then, 14 months into his jungle life, the ground cracked open, and crude oil crept up the test shaft, like a slow sunrise. The land was sitting on oil. Jae-won sat beside that shaft for a full hour without moving, without speaking, without crying. Just a man, alone in the jungle, with $1 billion secret at his feet. When he finally stood, he picked up his satellite phone, the one Commissioner Amara had given him, and made a single call. "I think you should come to Owerri. Bring your lawyer." Within 5 years, the joint venture between Jae-won's company, registered as Parklands Nigeria Limited, and the Imo State government, had produced enough revenue to make Jae-won Park a multi-billionaire. He built an estate on the edge of the same jungle where he had once slept under zinc roofing. He drove a black G-Wagon through the same streets where he had once walked barefoot and penniless. Nigeria had done to him what Korea had failed to do. It had made him rich, but it had also left him with a brand, that no amount of money could erase. The brand of a convicted man. By 2012, Jae-won Park was one of the most talked about men in Owerri. His face appeared in business magazines. He sponsored a hospital wing. He funded scholarships for children who looked nothing like him. He was invited to galas and governors' dinners. But the moment the lights went low, and people leaned close to whisper, the story was always the same. He was in prison, you know. He came here as a convict. 3 women. That was how many times Jae-won had tried to build something real. 3 women from prominent families, who had seemed genuinely drawn to him, who had laughed with him, who had looked at him in a way that felt like possibility, until the conversation with their parents happened. Then the excuses came. A prior engagement, a family pressure, a sudden trip abroad. One woman was different. A beautiful Lagos banker named Adiz. She hadn't cared about his past. Her family had. Her father, Chief Uchenna, sat across from his daughter one evening and said slowly and deliberately, "My daughter will not marry a man who was somebody's prisoner. I don't care how many billions he has. Wealth can be traced. Shim cannot be untraced." Adiz came to Jae-won in tears. "I'm so sorry. I love you. But they will disown me. They will cut me off completely. I can't." Jae-won looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Go, Adiz. A love that can be cancelled by a phone call from your father was never really yours to give." He drove home that night alone. He sat in his enormous, empty living room. 12 bedrooms, staff quarters, a cinema room, koi pond, and for the first time since walking out of prison, he felt like he was back in Block C. Just a man, surrounded by walls, utterly alone. He had turned a jungle into an empire. But no one had told him that the loneliest place in the world is a mansion with no one to come home to. Her name was Chisholm Ezenwachi, 24 years old, the 3rd daughter of a middle-class schoolteacher from Bays. She worked as a community health volunteer, coordinating maternal health programs in the rural areas surrounding Owerri. She drove a battered Kia hatchback. She wore no designer clothes. And she had absolutely no interest in billionaires. She first encountered Jae-won Park. Not at a gala. Not at a business function. Not at a governor's dinner. But in the bush. She was driving along a dirt road near his old jungle property when her tire blew out completely. She was still crouched by the flat tire, phone raised to the sky to find a signal, when a black G-Wagon slowed to a stop beside her. The window came down. Tom voiced, "Do you need help?" Chisholm looked up. She recognized the face. Then she looked back at her tire and said flatly, "Only if you know how to change a tire. If you just want to give me advice, I don't have time." Jae-won Park, billionaire, oil magnate, one of the most powerful men in Imo State, got out of his G-Wagon, removed his jacket, laid it neatly on the bonnet, and got on his knees in the red dust, and changed her tire himself. Chisholm watched him with her arms folded, suspicious, quietly impressed but unwilling to show it. When he stood and dusted off his hands, she said, "You're the Korean man, the one who owns the oil land." He replied, "I am. And you are the woman who was going to change her own tire, without my help." She almost smiled. Almost. Just, I still could have. They exchanged numbers. Purely practically, she told herself on the drive home. But she found herself thinking about him anyway. And she was annoyed by it. He found himself thinking about her too. And he was surprised, because it was the first time in years that someone had spoken to him, as if his money was completely irrelevant. Their courtship was slow, cautious, full of tension. He took her to his estate once. She walked through the 12 rooms in silence, past the cinema room, past the koi pond, past the marble and the crystal and the imported furniture. And then she sat on the back veranda, overlooking the edge of the jungle, and was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "It's beautiful, but it feels like a place that has been loved by an architect and ignored by a person." Jae-won stared at her. That is exactly what it is. She left that evening without asking for anything. No designer bags. No cash. No reservation at a restaurant designed to impress. She simply said goodnight, got into her battered Kia, and drove home. It was, without question, the most attractive thing anyone had ever done. To Jae-won Park. When Chisholm's family found out she was seeing Jae-won Park, the reaction was swift and volcanic. Her mother, Mrs. Ngozi Ezenwachi, stood in the middle of the family sitting room and said with her whole chest, "Chisholm, a Korean man. A Korean man who came to this country in chains. What will people say? What will our people say? You want to use your life and disgrace this family?" Chisholm said quietly, "Mom, he is a good man." Her mother cut her off. "A good man? A good man does not come to Nigeria as a prisoner. You think his billions came from goodness? Everything that man has is stained. And if you marry him, you are stained too." Her father said nothing. He simply walked into his room and did not come out for dinner that evening. And in their family, that silence was louder than any shouting. The aunties descended like a weather system. Phone calls. Visits. One aunt brought a pastor who spent 45 minutes explaining why the Bible warned against unequal yoking, and stretched the definition so far. It somehow included international criminal history and racial difference in the same breath. The community added its voice. Market women who knew her mother whispered when Chisholm passed. A neighbor told her to her face that she was being used. A man at church said, loudly enough to be overheard, that a woman who chased a Korean convict would die alone, when he inevitably abandoned her. And then came the true pressure. Social banishment. Chisholm's mother announced to the extended family that until Chisholm came to her senses, she would not be welcomed at family gatherings. Her cousin's traditional wedding, an event Chisholm had helped plan for months. She was not invited. She sat in her small rented apartment the evening of that wedding, listening to the music drift through her phone from other people's videos, watching her family celebrate without her, and she cried until she had nothing left. She called Jae-won at midnight. Her voice was breaking when she said, "Tell me honestly, is this worth it? Because I am losing everything. And I need you to tell me if this is real." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Jae-won spoke. "Chisholm, I lived in a jungle for 2 years. I have sat in a prison with 40 men who hated me. I have been called every name and given every reason to leave this country. And I stayed. Not because Nigeria was easy, but because something in it felt like it was mine. You feel like that? You feel like something that is mine. But I will not tell you to stay, if the cost is your whole life." Chisholm was quiet for a long time. "I hate that you said that, because now I have no excuse." What happened next was something neither of them had anticipated. Jae-won made a decision, a quiet one, unannounced. He drove to Mbaise. He found Chisholm's father's house. He knocked on the door himself. No lawyers. No entourage. No show of wealth. Just him and a small bag. Inside that bag were 2 documents. First was his full criminal record. Every charge. Every conviction. Every detail of his time in Nigeria's prison system. Was his full financial disclosure. Certificate. Nothing hidden. He sat across from Chisholm's father, a schoolteacher named Mr. Chibiz Ezenwachi, and he placed both documents on the table between them. Sir, I am not here to convince you I am a good man. I am here to show you exactly who I was and who I became. You deserve to see both before you make your decision, and whatever you decide, I will respect it. Chibiz Ezenwachi, a man who had spent 30 years grading honesty in young people, looked at the two documents. He read the first one slowly. He read the second one slowly. Then he looked up at Jae-won Park, a foreigner with honest eyes, in a strange land, who had come to his door alone, with his worst and his best, laid open on the table. In all my years of teaching, I never met a student who brought me their worst work and their best work at the same time, and said, "Judge me fairly. Most men only show you the best. You showed me everything." He paused. Then he said, "Come inside." He called toward the kitchen, "Ngozi, bring Kola nut." From inside the kitchen, suspicious silence, then the sound of footsteps. It was not a complete victory. Ngozi cried through the entire Kola nut ceremony. Two aunties refused to attend. The extended family convened an emergency meeting and formally declared that Chisholm had been led astray by money and foreign influence, a statement that would follow her for years. But her father's door was open, and in Igbo culture, when the father opens the door, it is the beginning of everything. He had fought his way out of a prison. Now he was fighting his way into a family. And somehow, the second battle was harder. They married in 2015, a ceremony that was equal parts Korean and Igbo tradition, held on the edge of the same jungle, where Jeon had once lived alone, in a zinc hut, with nothing but a gas lamp and a dream. Chisholm wore a white gown for the Western ceremony, and a deep red and gold George wrapper for the traditional. Jae-won wore a hanbok, the traditional Korean garment, the first one ever worn in Imo State, then changed into a richly embroidered Igbo agbada that his tailor in Owerri had spent 3 weeks perfecting. Father Innocent officiated the ceremony. Warden Emeka Obi, now retired, sat in the front row and wiped his eyes with a handkerchief, though he denied it afterward. Chukwudi and Ifani, the two young men who had helped Jae-won survey that jungle land years earlier, now directors in his company, stood beside him as his groomsmen. Some of Chisholm's family came. Some did not. But her father was there, and her mother, who had cried through the Kola nut ceremony, and the introduction ceremony, and every difficult conversation in between, sat in the front row beside her husband. And when Chisholm walked past her, her mother reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. She did not let go. Jae-won Park runs one of Nigeria's most diversified business conglomerates, agriculture, and a foundation that funds education in Imo State's rural communities. He speaks Igbo with an accent that makes old men smile. He still visits the jungle, now a protected green space on the edge of his estate. Sometimes, early in the morning, he walks its edge alone. Chisholm runs the foundation. She still drives a practical car, and she still gets quietly irritated when people are inefficient. They have 2 children, a boy named Kaneo, his Igbo name, and a girl named Senna, which is both Korean and African, and works perfectly for both. When interviewers ask Jae-won what his greatest achievement is, he never says the oil field. He never says the billions. I arrived in Nigeria in chains. Real ones. On my wrists. And I thought the chains were the worst thing that ever happened to me. But those chains brought me here. To this land. To this woman. To this life. So I keep them. In a glass case. In my office. To remind myself, sometimes the thing that breaks you open is the thing that makes room For everything beautiful. Chisholm, sitting beside him in that interview, looked at him when he said it. She did not say anything. She simply reached over and covered his hand with hers, just like her mother had done at the wedding. Had become gold. Chains of gold. A story for those who believe that where you have been does not determine where you are going.